Good morning, everyone, and apologies for my slight lateness. I got detained on the bus. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Ray, and I will be chairing today's meeting. There is a fire alarm test due at 10:30. We will pause business until the alarm stops sounding and continue afterwards. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the Council's website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. I'm now going to invite members and officers to introduce themselves. Please remember to turn off your microphones once you introduce yourself, and we'll go in this direction.
Hello, I'm Kate Sadler and I'm the lead officer to the committee.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Truswell, councillor for Middleton and Belle Isle.
Councillor Dowson, ward councillor for Chapel Allerton ward.
Good morning, Councillor Morel Michlicki, Paxton Methley ward.
Good morning, Councillor Gower Almas from the Beeston and Holbeck ward.
Good morning, my name's Andy Dobman. I'm the Chief HR Officer for the Council and I'm here for agenda item 11.
Morning, Andrew Byram. I'm the Deputy Chief Digital Information Officer.
Morning, everybody. Aaron Linden, Head of Information Management and Governance.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Louise Booth and I'm the Head of Audit.
Morning, I'm Angela Laycock, Principal Audit Manager.
Good morning, Brenda McLaughlin, Audit Manager.
Morning, I'm Mary Hasnip, Head of Finance in Corporate Financial Management.
Good morning, I'm Richard Ellis, Deputy Chief Officer, Financial Services.
Good morning, Perminda Sethi, Grant Thornton, External Auditors.
Good morning, Linda Wild, Independent Member.
Morning, Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden ward.
Good morning, Billy Flynn, Councillor of Waterdown ward.
Good morning, I'm Debbie Oldham and I'm the clerk today.
Thank you much, everyone, and again, apologies for the slight delay in the start of the meeting. Agenda item number 2, any appeals against refusal or inspection of documents?
Do you want me to go?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal or inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there are no exempt items. Under agenda item 3, there's no formal late items. However, there was supplementary information in relation to agenda item 10, which is the approval of the 2020-21 statement of accounts and the Grant Thornton audit report. These have been circulated. Can I just check that all members have got a copy? Thank you. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interests? I take silence as there are none. And under agenda item 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Harrand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So moving swiftly on to item number 6 and 7, which is the minutes. Are the minutes the correct record of the meeting held on the 20th of November 2022? I'll take silence for the yes. Fantastic. And are there any matters arising?
Just a few matters, Chair. There have been briefing notes circulated to members in relation to item 50 on the redesignation of contractors in response to YR 35. Follow-up questions. Officers are looking into the questions raised and will come back when they've got the answers to those questions. Item 51, whistleblowing information, and item 53, insurance arrangements, have also been the subject of notes which have been circulated. In relation to item 52, I just wanted to bring to members' attention the paper that was considered at the Scrutiny Board Resources on the 16th of January. There was a paper on mass communications and consultation, which very much played into the conversation that had been had around performance. So members may wish to go back and have a look at that.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any other further matters arising that have not already been covered or appear elsewhere in the agenda? Take silence as a no. So moving on to item number 8, the joint annual assurance report for information governance and management. So I'll hand over to you guys.
Thanks, Chair. Not wishing to repeat the contents of the report, I'd just like to highlight 3 key points from it. First of all, the council maintained its PSN, that's the Public Services Network certification. That was achieved in October 2022, and that ensures that we can continue to share information securely. Second point, as the committee was made aware of last year, internal audit provided us with a recommendation to improve the oversight, the recording and completion of data protection impact assessments in early 2022. I'm pleased to report that significant work has been done in relation to this. And in December 2022, in line with the council's digital strategy, we began working with IDS colleagues on a Power Up to create suitable technology to support the process. The Power Up sprint is ongoing as I speak, and we aim to go live with the new process and software in April 2023. Thirdly, as a key point, as was also reported last year, performance in relation to information requests has again improved from the previous year, as was the case last year as well. And on the back of making significant changes earlier in this year, we saw performance hit just under KPI of 90% in Q2. Admittedly, consistency has been an issue, and whilst we must acknowledge the continuing resource pressures which my team and other frontline services face, many of whom provide the information to respond to information requests, we have both short-term and long-term plans to work with services to improve this. And wishing to keep this introduction short, full details of this will be included in a report going to Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board on the 20th of February, but some improvements will include the development of a process-tailored Power Up for information requests and robust escalation. I'll conclude there for any comments or questions.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll open up to members for questions or comments. Councillor Swell.
Chair, we are on 7, aren't we?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. It just fazed me ever so slightly. The officer did make reference to the performance tables with regard to responses to requests for information on page 26 and 27. I think one of the difficulties is that we receive this assurance report as the committee that oversees governance, but it's strategy and resources that really picks the bones out of some of these measures. And it's reassuring to hear that there will be a report on these particular performance indicators. It's still quite worrying, though, that there has been a decline, as the officer said, over time. And I would hope that maybe this committee, and I probably won't be a member of it when it does, actually has a look at that report that goes to strategy and resources, just to reassure ourselves that if we are endorsing the reports that come to us, the assurance reports, that the bones are actually being picked out of it. Because, as I say, there has been a fall off over time. It seems to have plateaued. The office is reassuring us that improvements are being introduced. And I think, you know, that's as far as we can take it, but I think we need to revisit it. If we are endorsing these approaches as a committee, then I think we need to be seen to be a little bit more robust in terms of receiving the figures that relate to them. I mean, the comparative figures, the benchmarking figures are also a bit of a worry, but presumably they will be addressed by the improvement measures that have been mentioned.
So Dawson, I think you indicated. Dawson, sorry, I'm having one of those moments. You can tell I got in slightly on the bus. I'm a bit flustered. No, okay, Councillor Illingworth.
Chair, it's just a point that follows on from Councillor Trussell has been saying. One thing which I'd like to see is that when reports are being released for public consumption because data is no longer confidential, that we do so with announcements and we do so quickly. I've come across cases where officers hung on to reports on the basis of confidentiality when it was obvious to all concerned in long past, and that basically the stuff could be released without prejudice to the authority, without compromising our data integrity at an earlier stage. And just urging speed, really, and saying it's important not to leave things too long.
Fair comment. Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 smallish questions, if you don't mind. Shall I do them all? And then do you want to answer them all, or do you want me to do them one at a time? Okay, that's fine. So on page 22, at the bottom of the table, you refer to the Information Management Board providing key assurance to stakeholders. My question is, what does that mean, and what does that mean for us as an audit committee? Do we expect to receive some assurances in that respect?
So in relation to the Information Management Board, this is actually being reviewed in terms of the positioning of it in relation to being chaired by the CIRO. I believe it should develop into an Information Assurance Board. In terms of the assurance, it would be able to provide through that. There should be regular reporting, first of all. So in terms of performance reporting, which is the information that's largely contained in this report, but also more information in relation to statistics, in relation to data protection impact assessments, in relation to the number of data sharing agreements that we have, the number of incidents that we have, the number of more serious incidents. So having been with Leeds for over a year now, and having been at 2 other local authorities, we've got a bit of work to get to where we should be, frankly. But that work is ongoing, and we will get to that point where we are satisfied we are on a good basis. So those reports will be going to that board and then shared across the authority as well. I'm not sure if this was previously in place, but maybe COVID had an impact, but there's not sufficient reporting as far as I'm concerned in relation to that. And then I would see a link to CLT, and then perhaps that's where we provide a bit more detail in relation to the Information Management Board / Assurance Board at a later date. Does that answer the?
Can I also add that I actually attend the board as well, so if there was anything of particular significance, I could escalate it to members through that route. Thank you.
Thank you for that. No, that does answer the question. Thanks, Louise, as well. So my next question is on page 24 regarding the training and training strategy. How you talk about the training, the strategy applying to all areas of the organisation, including outsourced and shared services. So how do we get assurance that actually takes place, and how do you monitor that training by our own staff, mandatory training, is taken up? And do you have a right to audit on the outsourced providers, for example, for their training adherence?
So in terms of our staff, we're actually just getting to the stage where we're closing down the training. The last update I had was about a week ago, and there were still 50 staff across the organisation who were still to do it. And the response to that was to start to look to close down their accounts, whereby their account would be locked out and they'd have to come back and do the training before they would get access. And obviously that's been a last resort. We have done multiple chases throughout the organisation, and the CIRO has been fully involved in relation to that. So whilst the training went out in September last year, that's taken a bit of time. We appreciate that frontline services are under a lot of pressure, and ultimately 50 staff still to do when there's 14,000 staff. We're quite assured that that's going pretty well. In terms of the suppliers and third parties, under GDPR, we have a right to audit if we wish to do so. It's not something I'm aware that we have done in the past. I say I'm conscious I've only been here for a year, and it's not something that's came up in terms of actively doing, but we certainly can, and that's something we should be looking into.
Thank you for that. And my final question, I did have a question around the performance, but that's already been addressed. Thank you. Is around the risk assessment table on page 33. It's great to see that you've got the risk assessment and the scores out there for us all to see. My question is around, do we have an appetite for what we want to, where do we want to be at? So you're presenting to us where we're at. Is that where we want to be as an organisation, or have we got further to go? If we have got further to go, is there an action plan in place to take us there?
In terms of in relation to the risks, I feel like I'm reviewing everything, having been here. We are working with Tim Rollett in relation to reviewing how information risk management is done. So at the moment, business risk management and information risk management are fundamentally different. However, by all accounts, they are done collectively at the moment, whereby they're added to directed risk registers. And we are looking to centrally coordinate how information risk is done. So we're reviewing that. In terms of the risk scores, I think that this is largely an extract from the full risk register, so there will be scores of which we aim to achieve. And I can certainly follow that up for you after this meeting. But yes, we are reviewing how they are done, because the key point of risks is they are put in place to escalate for a reason, for reporting purposes, but also it's the actions that should be done. And we want to review how actions are managed, whereby they're not a line of text, they are a physical action with assigned owners and status updates to fully report the progress in relation to them.
Thank you for that. I think it would be helpful to see where we, are we at a point where we want to be, or is there further to go? I think that would be helpful for the committee if the chair agrees. Thank you for that.
Now for actual Councillor Dawson.
It's just on the freedom of information, and the table's really interesting. I would love to know what happened in Newcastle Q4 of 21-22, but by the by, I think, like a lot of councillors, we believe that as much information as we can get out should be out, and as quickly as possible. With that in mind, it would be interesting to know how many of the freedom of information requests actually are for information that is actually already available. Perhaps there's a statistic you don't have, but how many is you know what I'm looking for. Sorry, I won't go on any more. And the other thing is the statistics are really good, but all these cities are different sizes. So it'd be interesting to know if, as a percentage of the population, we're high. Are we getting a lot of freedom of information requests, or is it just even percentage wise with the number of people in the city? Thank you, Chair.
So in relation to the first part, if information is already available in the public domain, for example, in FOI terms, we refuse that request. By all accounts, we refuse it, but then we tell the person where they can access it. So we could get the data for that. The issue will be, we as a team or the service have got to, the answering officer have got to know it's already available. So if they just answer it and we just issue it, then we wouldn't know that. But by all accounts, we would have that data, and we can certainly get that for you if that would be helpful. We are, same again, reviewing things. We want to publish as much information as we possibly can. So where we can identify trends in relation to repeated requests, for example, we're getting in touch with the service to say, right, if you publish this on a proactive basis, perhaps quarterly, then we would fill that into our triaging process, and we would simply respond in that vein.
So is there any change that you feel that could be made in the process in all departments that would make your life easier? Because you've already told us how resources within your department are limited and stretched at the moment. And also it would be interesting to know what the cost to the authority is of freedom of information requests.
In terms of, from a business process perspective, I am a fan of front loading the process, and IG is not just about FOI and data protection, it's about records management as well. So we are starting up an information strategy which will work over the next 3 to 5 years in relation to how we process business information. So it will look at Office 365, it will look at business classification. So that's grouping our information by function, by activities, etc. So largely we'll be able to tag data, so it will make it easier to find. We could also build that in part of that process, an assessment of should this information be public. Probably linked to that is the security marking. We don't have a security marking, as many other local authorities do, and that one of the marking would be publicly available. So that's a work program we're going to work on over the next few years. But that's something it's not going to be done overnight, I'll be honest with you. In terms of the cost, it's not something we've done in the period of time that I've done, but it's something we want to look to do. I'm very conscious we are making a lot of changes. We've made a lot of changes to process, and we'll make further changes to the system. So largely because we're going through that change, whatever we costed it at now would be very different in 6 months' time. But I think that's a valid point that we should be looking at to do, maybe perhaps the end of this year. I'm sorry, there was a point you made at the start that I don't think I've answered.
If you haven't answered it, I've forgotten what it was. But just to say, I think that's really good that you are looking at process, because if people can easily access the information that they need without having to put a freedom of information request, it'll save on workload for you, and it'll actually save the council money as well. But we won't know that until you've got some figures to show us. But thank you for that. It's really good.
So it's also worth noting, and this is very forward thinking, and we know a couple of local authorities that have done this, whereby they've adopted AI in relation to if a request comes in, it will actually search online to see if the information is already available, and then it can give a score. So we could actually, like I say, we're not looking at this as a day-to-day basis, but in the future we would look to get to that stage. And then furthermore, if it couldn't find the information publicly available, it could search internally automatically. So, but we need to put this infrastructure in place to do that with the tagging, etc. Otherwise, it would just find anything and everything with keywords. So there's a lot of fundamental work to be done to do that. But that's the journey we want to go down.
Just one quick follow-on question from me, just in relation to that, and it's kind of it's kind of on that border ground between different committees. Obviously, in terms of making something publicly searchable, one of the issues we have with our current website is that it searches for everything. So you've got the customer facing stuff for the residents, and then you've got the entirety of the democracy of the council uploading at the same time, particularly around those security concerns and security marking and making sure the right information is delegated. Are there conversations with colleagues around the rebuild of the website to make sure that effectively there's actually two websites? There's the customer facing council service inside, and then a much more secure democracy side where you can actually all have that built in properly, because one of the great failings of our website at the moment is literally you put in a keyword and you bring up everything since time immemorial, and it doesn't really work. So is that, in terms of the security, the access, the governance, is that being fed into the redesign of the website?
To be honest, it's a great suggestion. I'll be honest, as of now, that hasn't been considered. But I think it's a fantastic thing that we absolutely should. I mean, don't get me wrong, it should be created. As I say, I'm talking from maybe semi-technical terms with business classification and tagging, etc. But by all accounts, that's how your search engines become more efficient, because you can filter down in relation to that. So yeah, I'll take that on to pick that up.
Thank you very much. Councillor Downs, I think you indicated.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just looking at the benchmarking performance table, and I don't know what spreadsheet you're using, but unless I've made a mistake, things don't seem to add up. So if you look at Leeds City Council's first column, sorry, it's page 27. The Q1 to Q4, and it's only a minor thing, but if you add those up, you don't get 2024, you get 2022. And further along, if you look at Newcastle, the last column on Q4 is 1289, yet the full total for the year is 1289. So the spreadsheet looks like it's got several errors contained in it. And if you look down at the next spreadsheet below and you add 206 to 210 to 142 to 191, you don't get 751. So I'm just wondering what's happening with the data, and how can we rely on data that doesn't appear to be accurate?
I'll need to look into this and recirculate the appropriate tables, if that's okay. Sorry.
Good spot. Any other questions or comments? No, so let me get me a little sheet up. So moving to the recommendation, then does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the report to consider the contents of this report and the assurance provided as the council's approach to information and management governance? I'll take silence as a yes. There we go. So moving on to the real item 8, because it was slightly coded wrong in my sheets, which is the decision-making statement. And oh no, I'm looking at the wrong one now.
It is.
I am looking at the wrong.
Chair, can I just?
I'm having one of those days.
With apologies to members, there was administrative glitch, shall we call it? Item 8 in your agenda pack is not the decision-making statement of internal control. To continue. It is in fact the update report on information and digital services, and the content of the report that you've got is right. It is just the title of the report, and it will be minuted correctly.
So moving on to that then, because this is what I get for just reading what's put in front of me straight away. So moving on to that report then, please.
Yes, good morning. So I trust you've read the report. One thing I would like to say is the first time IDS have used this new statement of internal control. So this will evolve over time. So it will improve as we start coming through these meetings. Just wanted to point that out. What I've tried to do is describe the new governance arrangements which we've been establishing in IDS over the last 2 years, such as the pre-digital board, digital board, design authority. And those boards are aimed to align digital principles and strategies and facilitate prioritisation across the council. Another element I'd like to pull out is the new tool Adaptive. So that's used to plan, track delivery of all work being done in IDS to understand capacity, availability and demand management. And again, the reporting coming out of Adaptive will become much more rich, and you'll be able to see how we're performing against our capacity levels. And then finally, I want to pull out the work to establish a digital academy. So that's a new team that we're creating to focus on employee skills and digital inclusion. Thank you.
Moving on to members' questions and comments then. Councillor Trustwell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think three questions. On page 48, 2 paragraphs at the top, 14 and 15, relate to information about the performance of the service centres and also the 2 risks areas of failure. Is that information? I know the information regarding the performance of the call centre or contact centres does come to us sporadically. Does that also go to Scrutiny and Resources Committee? And can we be assured that that will continue? And in respect to 15, does that information also see the light of day in terms of member scrutiny, democratic scrutiny? Then I'm moving on to page 50, the bar charts, and I suppose it's a case of how you look at information like this. The report tends to take the glass is 80% full, whereas as a cynical member, I might see it as 20% empty, and I'm just wondering what steps are taken to close that gap. And finally, paragraph 31 makes reference to the limited capacity of IDS and the fact that services are being offshored. Now, is that another word for outsourced, or is it outsourcing beyond the boundaries of the UK? You know, when you talk about offshoring, you think about the Bahamas. I'm sure it's not that. And as a corollary to that, if we are having to take this expedient, is it a short-term expedient, or is it something that we're looking at in the future? i.e., would we get better value for money through employing people directly rather than outsourcing or offshoring? Thank you, Chair.
And just coming on that last point first, so we are looking at augmenting the IDS team with offshore resource. It could be nearshore, it could be offshore. This isn't about outsourcing. This is about bringing people in with the new digital skills we need around things like power apps, robotic process automation. they will come in and work alongside our staff in a digital way, so online, to allow our staff to develop those skills. So this isn't an idea of outsourcing the team abroad. This is about augmenting the team with people with the appropriate skills to help us deliver at pace.
So, just to chip in, Chair. So offshoring means bringing in technical expertise from outside. So, but is a form of outsourcing. It's bringing skills from outside the council that we don't have within, either in terms of overall capacity or the actual skills required.
Correct, but what we're looking to do is work alongside each other. So this is about they come and help us while we develop our skills within our internal development team. We've got a very small development team in house at the minute, but we're looking to do some very ambitious things, as Aaron mentioned previously, around potentially AI to look at how we're doing FOI requests. So we need to bring people in with those specialist skills that can help us. But this isn't about it stays there forever. It's about how do we develop our people alongside them, and then they stand down.
Just very quick on that point before you answer the rest of council, I think, because Councillor Swells, sometimes language is important, and sometimes using one word when a sentence would be better is suggestible, because that suggests outsourcing, not bringing in expertise for particular projects. So I would maybe suggest dropping some of the jargon and using a sentence instead of a word. I think you had some other point. Did you raise, Councillor Swells, that haven't been picked up?
Yes, Chair, and I think I probably can remember them. Sorry, Jane. It was the glass, is it 80% full or is it 20% empty? And what we're doing to address that particular void, the 20% of people saying that either they don't think that it's embedded at all, or simply don't know. And I think my other question about information coming to either this committee or to scrutiny boards or both relating to contact centre performance, I think we've got an assurance that that does come regularly. But the other information related to paragraph 15, I'm just wondering whether that sees the light of day in terms of member democratic scrutiny.
I'll have to take that away and find out. We do report that in somewhere, quite where it goes, I'm not sure, so I'll have to find that out for you.
Councillor Flynn.
It's really following on from what Paul said about, I mean, the paper majors a lot on communications and how important they are. The survey that you've quoted the results of here, could you tell me how many people were actually surveyed and what the answers to that survey actually were in terms of percentage?
The survey on page 50 is the survey of internal control, Councillor Flynn. So that looks at a number of internal control environments across the council that together form our framework of internal control. Last year's survey was somewhere in excess of 400 officers who were tier 4, 3, 2, 1. So directors, chief officers and below of PO6 grade and above. We are in the process of repeating that survey at the moment, but we have refined the sample that we're looking at so that we are just looking at those heads of service, so those officers who report directly into chief officers and have direct control of the operational teams within their remit, so that they can tell us exactly what's going on within their service and provide that assurance. So as I say, that is ongoing at the moment. There are something like 130 officers in the survey this time around.
Thank you. As Paul said, you know, whether the glass is 80% full or 20% empty, whatever, I tend to take the pessimistic sort of view, particularly with regards to communications, and certainly so far as I couldn't get into my Word documents over the weekend and spent nearly 2.5 hours because the system just would not work. There are issues regarding business continuity. If the IT system goes down, lots of a lack of confidence in that, and as Paul said, an overconfidence that, you know, you're able to sort of cope and so on and so forth, whereas you don't have the capacity clearly to be able to deliver what you're trying to deliver. And I wonder if the major IDS activity at the moment is just too much, given everything else that's going on in the council, particularly with regard from a financial position.
I think I would say, Councillor Flynn, we've gone through a big change over the last 2 years. We've done a reorganisation of the teams. We're still finishing off, filling some of those posts so that we're embedding those new teams. So there's a lot of work gone on. My view, it's going to get significantly better as we move forward because we're now starting building those teams. And just on your point on business continuity, the move to the cloud is precisely for that, to give us more secure and more available services. So we don't necessarily have to rely on having a connection at work. Eventually, we're going to be web-based for everything, so that's going to take time, but that will bring that business continuity as we move to the cloud.
My cloud is full, I'm told. Genuinely, quite genuinely. And I'm seeing Rob Sykes this afternoon because every time I try to access stuff on my iPad, I cannot do it. Now, that's just me as a councillor. I'm not particularly important in the grand scheme of things. What about the 13 or 14 or 15,000 members of staff here? If that happens to them, particularly as 50% of them are working at home.
I'm aware of some of the challenges you've got, Councillor Flynn, at the minute. As you say, you've got someone meeting with you this afternoon. We're confident that our services that we're going to put out there are going to be robust enough to, for an enterprise in terms of the size of storage that people will have and won't run into those sorts of problems, Councillor Flynn.
It's not a criticism of what you're trying to do, Andrew. It's the results basically, and people trying to sort of access stuff. The report itself talks about only 20% of respondents indicated the arrangements are either not embedded or they do not know. That's 1 in 5. Not just only, that's 1 in 5 members of staff. And I have no doubt. I've spoken to Leonardo about it. I know how hard the staff are working to try and do all of this, but I just wonder if you just try to do too much. If I can't get into my iPad over a weekend, hours wasted, what's the point?
As I said in the previous answer to the question before, we are looking to bring in more resource to help us deliver at pace. So where we haven't got those specialist skills, we are going to bring them in to help us. We're still embedding a lot of the team, so I'm confident it will improve. Just in terms of this survey, as Kate said, that is going to be repeated and it should start to show, well, hopefully an improvement in there as we start embedding those new teams.
Councillor Dowson.
I was quite impressed looking at your governance bodies, and you know how preoccupied we get sometimes with procurement, both external and internal for roles. So I was quite pleased to see you've got a procurement approval meeting, not a board, but a meeting. So that's and I was wondering, how often did that meet? What authority does it have? And when's the decision made, or who makes the decision not to procure or outsource roles, but actually to employ within, knowing how interesting the procurement market is at the moment with shortages and increase in prices, and also knowing how difficult it is to recruit in certain areas as well. I would imagine that is quite an influential meeting, and if it isn't, it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. That procurement approval meeting meets every month. So what it focuses in on is any application or business applications where it's coming to an end of contract and there's a renewal. So what we do in that meeting is look at whether is other software in the council that can actually provide the same service rather than just renewing. We have a real focus on value for money there to try and ensure that we're not just renewing contracts time and time again. So that's what it tends to focus on, and what we try and do is plan it in so you've got at least 3 months before the contract due date, so there is time to do a proper review and look what else there is there. So that's what it tends to focus on, but it's monthly.
Just a question for me over prioritisation. Everybody wants their piece of the cake, basically, and everybody says their particular IT project's the most important. It's going to deliver the best for the council. It's going to deliver the best savings. What is how are you assuring that the actual decision has been made by officers, and also in terms of senior political accountability, are feeding into the prioritisation of the process, so that it's not just the person that shouts the loudest, but that there's actually assurance that we're prioritising those projects, as I think as Councillor Flynn's alluded to, that actually deliver the most bang for the buck for the council in terms of what we do. So what is the assurance process around prioritising effectively, but also making sure there's appropriate democratic accountability from senior members of the cabinet, etc.?
So prioritisation is done through the pre-digital board and the digital board. They're new boards that have been set up in the last couple of years. So within those meetings will be very senior officers that meet across the various directorates, and they get together to do that prioritisation in that meeting.
But where's the democratic accountability from senior cabinet members? Because you may deem one thing to be a priority, but the political leadership of the council may deem something else to be the priority. So what's the interconnect between those two conversations to make sure what you think is the priority is the same as the elected members think is the priority?
Thank you. I'll need to take that away and ensure that we, in terms of how this describes the governance bodies within IDS, it actually puts something in there as well that shows what that accountability is, if that's okay.
If you don't mind, because as much as you are guys are the experts, it's the politicians that set the direction of the council. Yeah, go on, Louise.
Thanks, Chair. What I would like to say is quite coincidentally this afternoon, I'm actually meeting with all of IDS SLT. We are actually going to do an exercise with the help of Kate and Angela to map out governance. And one of the areas we are particularly looking at is escalation routes to CLT and members. So some of that information will be feeding back to you shortly.
That was good timing. Any other questions or comments? Okay, if there are no other questions and comments, moving on to the recommendation. Where are we? Does the committee agree the recommendation as set out in the report to consider and note the positive assurance set out in the IDS statement of internal control attached to Appendix A to this report? I'll take silence as a yes. There we go. Oh. Okay, do we need to take a more formal vote then if that's the case?
Do you need to that recording, Councillor Flynn?
Okay, that's fine then. Okay, so moving on to the next report, the internal audit update report. So.
Right, I'm here to present the internal update report for the period 1st of September to the end of December. I will assume that everybody's read the report. Members will notice that we've included our data analytics strategy as part of this update report. This outlines our vision, aims, and key areas of focus for data analytics to assist in the delivery of our internal audit plan. This is in draft as it requires final approval from internal audit leadership team. However, we wanted to bring it to the committee to enable them to have sight of it prior to approval. In terms of the update report itself, members will notice that within Appendix A, we have included some movements within the internal audit plan, and that reflects the council's risk profile changes during the year. In terms of limited opinions, we have undertaken 2 reviews at 2 primary schools that have resulted in a limited opinion for compliance with controls. In both cases, the main weaknesses were around compliance with procedures for creditor payment and the management of the school voluntary fund. And in one school, there were also weaknesses found within payroll procedures. The head teachers at both of the schools have agreed to implement the recommendations raised during the audits, and we will be reviewing the implementation of those in follow-ups during 23-24. In terms of follow-ups, we haven't actually completed any in the period under review. We continue to work with directorates to embed the recommendation tracking process. We're proactively obtaining feedback from that and using that to continue in its development. And the other thing to mention is that we are currently building an internal audit plan for the 23-24 year, which we'll be bringing to the committee in the March meeting. So if members have any areas that they wish to include for consideration, could they please let us know by emailing Louise?
And I'll open it up to questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. You touched upon the primary school audits, and I was going to ask about that because it says about the limited compliance assurance. Now, if I understand correctly, you've looked at 2 schools and both have sort of raised areas of concern. Is this something that you're going to extend out to look at more schools? Because if you've looked at 2 and 2 have got areas of concern, that tends to suggest a more worrying picture. And then the other thing is just to understand, it says that it's not applicable to organisational impact. Well, if there's schools that are under LEA control and there's issues there, is there nothing there that will have an impact?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the information that we gather from all audits does feed into the flexible annual audit plan. As you've noticed at the beginning of the report, there are ins and outs to the audit plan. So we do respond to any information we get. So what we'll be doing is looking at trends and then feeding that into next year's audit plan as well. And with your last question, the organisational impact, I understand that it could be quite confusing from the table, but it's actually the organisational impact for the Leeds City Council, not for the school. But actually reading it in this table format, I can understand why you think actually it would have organisational impact for that individual school. So we will look at reviewing how we present that information. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my point was more the fact that if there is a serious problem at a school and it's an LEA school, does that not reflect back on the council? So does it not impact into our thing? And the other thing, just to clarify the answer to the first bit, does that mean you will be looking at further schools next year? Because obviously, as I say, 100% of the 2 schools investigated does raise concern.
So we have a risk-based rolling programme for schools. So we look at schools every year. So there will always be schools on the programme. And for the impact on the whole of the City Council, a school that size wouldn't actually have such a significant impact, like financially. Yes, there's obviously reputational damage potentially, but when you take the organisation as a whole, it wouldn't be deemed to have significant impact on the organisation as a whole. Thank you.
One last quick go. Sorry about this. So you say that you review schools annually. That's fine. I'm just concerned that if you've reviewed 2 and there's 2 problems, whether it's something that needs a bit more of a deep dive. That's all.
No, we don't review every school annually, but we do review some schools. We do look for trends, and then we work with the finance teams as well in financial management, communicate to schools regularly. So we look at other ways of actually working to improve, not just by doing audits. Sometimes it's proactive work with these bodies.
So I think just for clarity on that, what we're saying is basically a risk assessment is done. You pick the ones that you think are the most risky, and that's where you do the work. I suppose the question then comes is what thought process goes into that risk assessment, and are we assured that the risk process that you're using to identify is sufficiently robust enough? I mean, it would suggest it probably is from the fact that you looked at 2 schools where you thought there was a problem or there was a risk and you looked at it, but are we sufficiently assured that the risk profiling you're doing is targeting the right people?
We obviously look at risk registers. We also look at other intelligence we can gather, news reports, conversations with other colleagues, children's and family colleagues, finance colleagues. So it is incredibly widespread. So we actually gather a whole raft of information when we're getting the intelligence to formulate that risk-based plan. And whilst it is a risk-based, risk registers only do form a part of that. And sometimes it does come down to auditor knows and understanding of the organisation that you work in.
No, that's quite good to hear. It's actually quite broad-based and not just data-driven. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Dawson.
Close, Chair. You'll get it right by the end. So I just wanted to ask, I was just checking, it's 3.1 and it's really refreshing to see that you update this all the time with items added and taken out. And there was two that I was going to ask at, but I'll hone it down onto one, which is the other directorate risks, city development, highways. And you've taken that out because they're doing their own work in this area, but you're going to consider it as an area for review in 23-24. I'm just wondering, as they are doing this work already, would it not save time and be of benefit to put somebody from the audit team in there while they're doing their review, and you can do both at the same time? Or is that just a non-starter?
We have many different approaches when it comes to doing audit work. Sometimes it's sitting alongside. It depends if there's a board or a working group that's overseeing a particular project. Sometimes it's retrospective. Sometimes we'll actually review some of the work that they do in the directorates. For this one, it was deemed to be this was the best approach. But as I've mentioned previously, the information management board, we do sit alongside and actually work with colleagues. It depends on what is deemed to be the best use of resources for that particular project.
Any follow-up, Councillor Dowson? Got it right this time. As well.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And I'm referring to page 59, the same table that Jane was referring to. It's very interesting that lots of work relating to adults and health has imposed itself on the agenda during the course of the year, and that raises not concerns but questions about why some of these areas weren't being looked at earlier. Clearly some of them relate to legislative responsibilities that have only really come falling onto the agenda. But one that I wanted to focus on was the external residential placement work, because I think that is an element of work that we as members and the public at large will be very interested in. There's been a lot of concern expressed through the media and publicly about the amount of taxpayers' money that's been channeled into private providers of children's care. And its quality, more importantly. And I just wondered how extensive that work is in terms of resources that are required from audit, when the final reporting is going to come to light, and again, where that's going to be reported to members. Will it be going to Adult Health and Active Lifestyle Scrutiny Board? It'll obviously be going to Executive Board. Will it be coming to us, or a mixture of all of them? And my second question relates to page 79 and the bar charts, the actual versus planned days. Presumably this is up to Q3, or it might be even earlier, but I had slight difficulty in reconciling all the bars between the agreed audit plan dates and the actual dates, and the bit in the middle, the pro rata audit plan dates. So obviously for my obtuse aging brain, it would be useful just to have that elucidated a little.
In terms of the external residential placements, that is an audit review that we are starting this week, actually. We will be discussing it with the directorate this week and looking to have something done hopefully by the end of March, and that will get reported through the annual through our update report, and should be included in our annual audit opinion as well. In terms of the pro rata days on that table, it is as simple as taking the annual days and dividing it by the number of months that have happened so far. So that will be 9 months worth of time. At the moment, we haven't got anything more sophisticated than that in terms of some things are slightly more cyclical and some things are front loaded and some things are back end of the year. But at the moment, it's just simply a 9/12 of the total time that we'd expected to spend during the year.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, I thought that that would be the case, but it still doesn't seem to correlate between the blue and the green bars. But anyway, I shall discuss it with officers so that I get a fuller understanding.
Other questions or comments before I'm blinded? There you go.
Thank you. Again, I have a couple of questions. Do you want me to do them one at a time, or do you want me to one at a time? Okay. So on page 59, you have 3 items relating to attendance at programme boards, which is great. I'm all for that ongoing live assurance, as it were. I'm just asking for a little bit more, I suppose, in that table. In the on one of them, and I haven't got it on the page in front of me, does tell me what you'll be doing at that board, but the other 2 don't. It just says you're attending the board. Well, that just leaves me wanting a little bit. So if you could just explain what you'll be doing at those 2 that you don't tell us what you're doing at, that would be helpful. Thanks, Louise.
Are you asking for me to include it more? Yeah.
Sorry, in your next updates, I think if you just include a one-liner, a couple of words to say actually what you'll be doing at that board.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Linda, because we have included it when we're reporting that we've done it. But yeah, I get your point about reporting it in advance, so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the second question I have is, I'm always on about the recommendation tracking. I love to see that recommendation tracking. Now you've got that information and you're starting to use it and present it to us, which I think is helpful. Are there any concerns that you have around any lagging departments, for example? I know we talked about schools earlier and the assurance that you've been able to provide or not provide in respect of the 2 schools. Just looking at that table on page 66, there's an indication that schools are not as forward as we might want them to be, maybe, on the progress that are making on their actions that are outstanding, that are overdue. So do you have any comments on that, Louise?
Yes, it is an area that does concern me. In fact, I've been speaking to the chair and I've asked the chair to issue the chief exec with an email asking to cascade information about encouraging officers to respond and keep these trackers updated, to obviously give us the oversight to make sure the control environment remains robust. It will also obviously add to my annual assurance opinion at year end, and obviously give you as committee members that assurance that actions are being taken proactively. Thank you.
Just want to confirm that email did go to the chief executive, and who confirmed that will be cascaded to senior leadership throughout the officer corps, etc. And that will be chased up in due course.
Yeah, I just have one more that's 2 connected. Sorry, Louise. So Appendix B, the quality assurance in section 3, you talk about plan dates for delivery of actions. You talk in specifically, my point is around the assurance mapping, another thing, that a subject that's close to my heart from an internal audit perspective. When will we see how that will inform your planning process? You know, will that be when you present your audit plan, or will you bring a separate paper to us for that? And then linked to that is same point, same quality assurances. When will we see your proposed performance measures and KPIs, Louise?
So as far as the assurance mapping, we do assurance mapping, but I was asked to see if Leeds could actually contribute to some to a SITFA working group around assurance mapping. Unfortunately, that hasn't got off the ground nationally. So I was holding back a bit because I didn't want to go down a route and it not conform with the professional body. So we are now trying to get more back up to speed, because obviously it is something that we can't not do. So it isn't as developed as I would have liked, purely because of what happened nationally. I would like to think that we could present something. I was hoping it was going to be as part of the annual plan, but obviously given what I've just said, that makes it a little bit more difficult. So I'm hoping to report it later on in the year, if that's okay. Was there a second? Oh, the KPIs. That can be reported as part of the annual plan as well.
Just one follow-up on that. Will the audit committee see that your proposed KPIs, or will they be presented to us as givens?
I'm hoping to consult with members.
Councillor Dowson.
Yeah, you stick anything red in a report and you're just going to hone in on it. And being a new member of this committee, abbreviations and things absolutely drive me insane. So this might seem very simple to my colleagues. On page 84, you've got a chart. It's called Meaningfully Monitor Officer Key Decisions Taken Under Urgency Procedures. And you've got an abbreviation there, GE or SU. What is GE or SU?
It's my problem, Councillor Dowson, not Louise's. So GE, general exception, SU, special urgency. And when I write the whole words into the boxes, I either have to write them so small that you can't see them, or the boxes become too big to get the rest of the information. So this is about monitoring the way that key decisions are published and the way that we go through the transparency and accountability that we should as a council. General exception means that the decision was taken at relatively short notice, but that the report was published 5 clear days in advance. So people had a chance to grapple with what we were doing. Special urgency, we had to take the decision and crack on with it. And you're given the reasons there for why we did it that way.
That's fine. And the colour scheme, as I say, anything red sort of flashes up and you think, my goodness, red. So SU, you've got 3 decisions here under GE and SU that are in red, 1 in amber and so on. Why are they red? Were they not taken, or were they very late, or why are they red, and were the decisions not made?
The decisions were taken, all of these decisions have been taken. The ones that are coloured red, I've coloured those boxes red because there is less transparency around them. So with a special urgency decision, there is no publication in advance of the decision being taken. And where it's exempt from call-in, there isn't that opportunity after the decision's taken for members to bring it back to scrutiny and say, have we really done the right thing here? And just press the pause button on those decisions. With general exception, you get the decision 5 days in advance, but you haven't known about it for the full 28 days that legislation would prefer. Just to be clear, both general exception and special urgency are set out in legislation. There is provision there that allows officers to use these shortened terms in specific circumstances. You will get further information around this and how it all works when you get the decision-making annual report later on in the year, if you're a member of the committee next municipal year.
Thank you for letting me know that. It does strike me that for urgent decisions, for it to get to that stage, it shouldn't get to that stage, that urgent decisions, but I know they have to. So I'll leave it for there and I'll wait till the further report comes out, and perhaps if I am on the committee, delve into it a bit deeper then. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, yeah, go on.
Just very quickly, and it's relating to the, where are we? The rollout of data analytics, and obviously we've discussed this on a number of occasions, and the fact that it will prove hopefully to be a very effective tool in terms of tracking down fraud, for example, and therefore will save a lot of actual officer time in that respect. Now we're only in the foothills of developing, and that's the second of 5 levels. And it's our ambition to become leading on this particular issue by October 25. Is it October 25? Is that relatively modest progress towards becoming a leading authority in this respect, or a leading proponent, the result of limited capacity, and or the fact that these things take time to roll out across an authority the size of Leeds, and presumably we'll be looking to move ahead in those areas of highest risk more quickly.
Thank you, Councillor. As far as data analytics strategy and the use of data analytics, we are already one of the leading public sector bodies in local government. We use it far more than any local authority in the area, for example. And with regard to the target dates, I've had to balance the delivery of the plan, the resources available, the emerging risks. So whilst, yes, it is a modest target, I do believe it is actually very achievable given the resources that we have and the other work we need to deliver. But obviously it would be nice if we could get there quicker.
So just as a quick follow on to that 2 seconds, sorry. So we're good for a local authority. Is the kind of the target to comparable maybe to an SME or a large company in their level of sophistication? Because if we've got a plan to improve it, but we're already a good local authority, so what are we aspiring to, if that makes sense? Are we, what other type of organisation who uses that kind of information in a much more systemic way are we trying to achieve or get to, should I say?
I think that's quite difficult. When I've obviously mentioned I've worked in the private sector, and the firm I worked for actually had a strategic partnership with McLaren F1, and they were using telemetry data. So obviously they've got very sophisticated software, real time, made real impact by their decision making. I think it depends how much you want to spend ultimately. I think it's that balance, isn't it? The sky's the limit when it comes to data, really.
Just a comment, really. I mean, it shows the difficult balance that we have to achieve, because obviously as an authority, we want to channel and focus as much of our resource as possible in providing frontline services, which is what the public want, what the public sees. But there's always a temptation to under-resource those backroom invisible services like audit, which are absolutely crucial to the effective and efficient management of the authority. And in case of things like fraud, actually saving money that's going to criminals that could be targeted on frontline services. And we did have the discussion under a previous agenda item about, and I'm not one for outsourcing, but I understand the point that was made, short-term project led, getting the expertise from outside. It's not something that we necessarily have to have in-house, whereas this is about having that continual expertise and capacity. And yeah, I think it's a difficult one for us. And at some stage, you just hope that we don't get a situation where if we'd spent a little bit more resource on the invisible activity of audit, we would have saved ourselves a lot of money. But I think that's one of the challenges facing the authority and facing this committee. But it would be interesting to know how quickly we could roll this out and what resource would be needed to do that more swiftly.
I think every department would like more money. Linda?
Well, Chair, could I just go back? Not necessarily now, because I'm not expecting an answer off the hoof, but it would be interesting to know how quickly we could roll this out if there was more resource, just as an academic exercise, so we know what balance we are making in terms of our ability to combat fraud.
Is that an answer you can give now, or do you need time to go away and come back with such an answer?
I think I need to think about that one.
We look forward to the briefing note, Linda.
Thank you. A couple of things from me. I think, firstly, I want to congratulate the internal audit function for putting together a data analytics strategy, because it's not common, in my opinion. So well done. And I think it's great to see. I'd go back, if I could, to my question around assurance mapping and how much use are you making as a third line function of what you've already got out there in the second line. And that pays to the point that Councillor Trustwell makes about efficiencies. You'll have, I'm sure, a whole host of continuous monitoring, live monitoring of data out there in the business already. I think it's about internal audit, if they can, making best use of that. And if you're able to bring that into your strategy, that would be a tip from me if you want one. But I do congratulate you on doing that. I think having a maturity assessment at the heart of it, so you've got a statement as to where you're aiming to be, is great. Hold yourselves to account on that as much as anyone else does for you, because it has a tendency, in my experience, to be put on a shelf if you're not careful. So do hold yourself to account on that maturity assessment, but well done. I think it's not a common thing to see from an internal audit perspective.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? No, so I'm going to go to the recommendation, which is going to take me about a minute to read through. Does the committee agree the recommendation set out in the report to A, receive the internal audit update report covering the period from September to December 2022 and note the work undertaken by internal audit during the period covered by the report? B, note that there have been no limitations in scope and nothing has been arisen to compromise the independence of the internal audit during the reporting period. C, receive the report providing information relating to the monitoring of urgent decisions covering the period September to December 2022. And finally, D, receive the internal audit data analytic strategy for 2022 to 2025. I will take silence as acceptance. There we go. Moving on then to the next item agenda, which is the final statement of accounts for 2020 to 2021 and the ISA 260, noting the supplementary item added to that as well. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just briefly talk about the accounts themselves and then hand over to Grant Thornton to present their audit report. So these accounts were originally issued in draft form back in July 2021. And we're required to update them as final audited accounts for any issues that have arisen or any changes in circumstances that have happened since then. A revised version of the accounts was actually brought back to committee at this time last year, and at that stage a small number of adjustments had already been identified. I've summarised those in the covering report. They related to updating the collection fund position and to some property valuations and to pensions. It was around this time last year that the national issue on infrastructure assets came to light, and that prevented any further sign-off of local authority accounts until that was resolved at a national level. That was resolved in December with the issue of new regulations and changes to the accounting code, and the only impact on our accounts is that we've needed to make additional narrative disclosures, and there's been a slight change to one of the disclosure tables, but no changes to the actual figures in the accounts. However, in the intervening period, another issue has come to light which we need to change some of the figures for. So as part of the 21-22 close down, a number of valuations were outsourced to the District Valuers Service, and one of those valuations, the valuation for Leeds Arena, resulted in a significantly different outcome from our previous valuation. The District Valuer advised that in the post-COVID environment, a depreciated replacement cost valuation basis will be more appropriate than the income-based valuation that we'd previously been using as a result of a reduced level of objective evidence out there to support an income-based valuation. Obviously, that change in circumstance would have applied to the 2021 accounts as well. So the district valuer was asked to revalue the Leeds Arena for 2021. That resulted in a significant increase in the carrying value of the Leeds Arena by £59.4 million. I would stress that that's a technical issue in terms of the way the asset is valued in terms of our balance sheet. It doesn't mean that if we were to put the arena on the market that it would fetch anywhere near £90 million, and the change in the valuation basis has no impact on our spendable reserves. So obviously, having got this information about Leeds Arena, we then needed to review the valuation basis for our other entertainment venues, the Grand Theatre, the Howard Assembly Rooms and the Carriage Works. And when consulted about those, the district valuer's view was that in his opinion, a DRC basis would have been more appropriate for earlier years as well, pre-COVID, because those aren't leased out on commercial terms. So as a result of the fact that the combined change in value for those 3 venues is slightly above Grant Thornton's materiality levels, we've needed to make a prior period adjustment to the accounts to reflect the figures as if those 3 assets had always been valued on a DRC basis. So in the revised version of the accounts that was circulated with the committee papers, you'll see that after the 4 main statements that you would usually expect, there is a 5th statement, which is a revised opening balance sheet position as at 1st of April 2019. As at this morning, we're not aware of any other issues that would cause any changes to the accounts. And so the recommendation is that the committee approves the version of accounts that were circulated with the committee papers as the final audited accounts. If I could just briefly refer to the management letter, which was attached as Appendix 1 to the report. That's the letter that Grant Thornton asked us to provide them with before they issue their opinion on the accounts. And again, officers are not aware of any reasons why that letter should not be signed, and Victoria intends to sign that letter. So members are asked to consider whether there are any issues that members are aware of that would have a bearing on it, and otherwise to authorise the chair to sign that letter on behalf of the committee. With that, I'll hand over to Grant Thornton to present their report.
Thanks very much, Mary, and thanks, Chair. We've got on here an updated ISA 260 report for 2021, and to try and aid members' review of it, we've just highlighted the key changes from the version that you've previously seen in blue text. And the bulk of those changes are essentially on the second page of the exec summary on page 6, pack page 6 of your agenda, and indeed in Appendix C in terms of the adjustments and disclosure changes that have occurred. I think Mary's covered the issues around the change in valuation of the assets that she's just talked through. And in addition, there were changes in the valuation of the council's share of the pension fund liability. Collectively, that was quite a significant material figure, and obviously comes off the back of a number of changes that were made in the prior year accounts in 1920. I think it is worth saying that whilst the value and level of adjustments is quite significant in 2021, as Mary touched on, they don't actually impact on the usable reserves of the council. So it's not affecting the bottom line, if you like, of the resources available to members, but nevertheless they are, from our perspective, material and significant in that respect. So we've discussed the issues with Victoria, with Richard, with Mary, off the back of some issues in the prior year, and from our perspective, I think there is the requirement, I guess, to try and reduce the level of amendments and changes that are made to the audit in 21, 22 and beyond. And we've acknowledged that management obviously have taken on board the comments from last year and indeed from finalising this year's audit. So we know that additional layers of quality assurance have been put in place in terms of the 21, 22 accounts and working papers. We understand internal audit colleagues have also been involved in that process. So the audit of 21-22 is currently in its early stages. We're aiming to conclude the field work and testing on that by the end of April. And obviously we'll comment back in terms of whether those enhanced procedures have hopefully improved the processes in 21-22. And I think the other key thing for us, and I know we've spoke about this a number of times before, one of the key issues I think that impact on the audit here at Leeds is the existing financial ledger. And again, management has taken action on that. We're expecting a new ledger to be in place, certainly by 1st of April 24. It may even be ahead of that. And I think that will certainly help, not just the accounts and audit process, but I guess from a wider business management information point of view, that will be an important procurement and implementation for that new ledger. So those was probably the key points to draw out, Chair. Obviously, the bulk of this report members have already seen before, but myself and Perminder are happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Flynn?
Apologies if I misunderstood some of the comments in the report, but a number of statements about the overvaluation of land or buildings. And given the council's use of capital receipts, I wonder if there's any possibility that, because we make a fairly good use, I think, of capital receipts, but the flexibility in using them is going to be withdrawn, I think, in a year or two. I don't know if there's any correlation between the two. Are we looking through rose-tinted glasses at capital receipts over the next 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Flynn. I think in terms of the use of capital receipts around the sort of minimum revenue provision, obviously at the point that assets are sold, they're valued on a different basis. So, you know, as Mary's already touched on, you know, if the arena was out on an open market, it's unlikely to get the valuation that's sitting in the 2021 accounts. But as you rightly say, I think the wider issue in terms of capital receipts is the fact that option is moving away going forward from that particular calculation, and that's probably a slightly different challenge than the accounting of the accounting treatment of the valuation of the council's assets. That the movement away from use of capital receipts when they have been utilised by this council and indeed others across the country. That's probably a wider challenge than necessarily the valuation basis per the statement of accounts.
Sorry, I really should have made clear it's not an issue for Grant Thornton. Obviously, it's just I think more of an issue for the council in that I think we do make good use of capital receipts, but obviously, if we're looking at a forward estimate, Richard, you're poised there with your finger on the button.
I was going to say, Councillor, in terms of what's set out in the medium-term financial strategy and in the council's budget as well, trying to make the revenue budget more robust, resilient and sustainable, the council has been on a journey of moving away from sort of capital receipts to fund recurring spend, things like MRP, PFI liabilities, etc. We're almost at the end of that journey now, and capital receipts flexibilities is probably the last sort of use we've got of that. Again, that's a government endorsed policy that we can do into 2025. As you're aware, there's an specific appendix on this within the budget report we received at Executive Board this week, which sort of details the transformational work that's being undertaken in current year and the forward financial year as well, and also what level of savings we expect to realise as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, a couple of questions from me, if I may. Just a very quick one on the valuations, and forgive me, I used to know the answer to these questions when I used to be an external auditor. The change in valuation to depreciated replacement cost, is that common for this type of asset then for other authorities, or is it just unique to the district valuer here at Leeds? That's my first question.
No, I'd say that the DRC basis is pretty common across the local authority sector.
Thank you for that. And then a couple of picky questions for me in respect of your report, Grant Thornton. You mentioned a breach regarding tax services provided to schools. So my understanding is that you have forgive me, is it a CRM system, a customer relationship management type system that flags potential breaches up? If you have one of those, then how did this happen? And how can we be assured as a committee that it won't happen again? And my second question separately relates again to action plan implementation. You've got a good action plan in your report there for officers for future. And I know you follow those up when you come in to do the audit on an annual basis, but is there a process that you have in place to follow them up sooner where they're able to? Because I noticed that there are no due dates on the action plan. I suppose should there be? Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. So your first question is an excellent question. It was one that Perminder and I asked ourselves at the time when it was actually Mary who brought this to our attention. So where I think there was a gap is that any new assignment that the firm takes on, they do a due diligence check on the organisation and the ownership thereof. So this particular school, there was a review of, I guess, the governors of the school, and nothing necessarily shouted out Leeds City Council, you know, the local vicar, various parents, teachers, etc. So that's why it sort of fell through the cracks. And what that's now led to is a very different change in terms of any tax VAT work for a school now. It's very clear that if it's an LEA school, is that linked to an audit client? And clearly with 40% of the local government market, you know, there is the possibility that, you know, this work was ongoing. So in a way, you know, we were obviously very grateful for Mary flagging this up at the time. And basically on the day that she did, action was taken, as we've tried to summarise there in the independent section. So, you know, revised procedures have been put in place. We've reported it to members, we reported it to the regulator and to PSAA, just to be open and transparent about it. But hopefully the new procedures should reduce that from occurring in the future. In terms of recommendations in our action plan, we will be picking that up as part of our ISA 260 report, I would expect on the 21-22 audit, which, as I say, has now commenced. We've got a good team on that work at present. We're aiming to conclude it by April, and we will summarise that in the ISA 260 report that I think will probably come to this committee in June, in terms of, you know, how that's progressed. And obviously the key thing from our perspective is, you know, some of the enhanced procedures that we know that the finance team have put in place. Hopefully they will come through in terms of, you know, a reduced level of audit adjustments in 21-22, and obviously closing down the audit more quickly, because, you know, we're all conscious, me and my team, Victoria, Richard and Mary, to get Leeds back onto a normal audit cycle as soon as we possibly can. So that's the aim, to try and obviously sign off 2021 this month, 21-22 aiming for the June audit committee, and then 22-23 at this meeting next year, but trying to conclude the field work by Christmas.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my point really around the actions is recognising how busy you all are, how busy the finance team is at close down time, how busy you guys are auditing Leeds and your other clients. Is there an opportunity, and there may not be, but is there an opportunity to be a bit more ongoing on the action implementation, the action tracking, so you're not just waiting until the year end to do that?
I mean, I think essentially because we're trying to conclude in effect 3 years worth of accounts this year, there will be an element of sort of continuity, and obviously there's going to be a lot of regular dialogue with Richard and Mary throughout 2023. So and there'll be regular reports coming through to this committee during that time. So, you know, we're mindful of the recommendations we've raised, and we will make, you know, appropriate commentary. Let's say that we're going to have reports coming in June, and probably an interim one September, November, and then the final one this time next year. So you will get that feel, I guess, for whether we feel those issues have been implemented appropriately, and the proof will come out in terms of the, you know, whether there's a similar level of issues in the 21-22 audit. Thanks.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. I'm referring to the Grant Thornton report. On page 16, there is reference to adjustments required to address pension liabilities, and on page 38, adjustments required to address issues relating to PFI. I just wanted to seek assurance that neither of those have any implications for the council's revenue, budget or reserves. And then just an observation, page 16, sorry, it's not page 16, it is page 52. And I realise that this is a draft letter, but there is a repeated section on the bottom of page 52, which is on page 53 as well, that needs to be taken out.
Yes, Councillor Tunstall, those adjustments in terms of the pensions and the valuation, that they're all reversed out, so they don't affect the council's reserves position about resources it had to fund sort of frontline services. That's correct, yeah.
Any more questions or comments from anyone? No. So moving on to the recommendation then. Does the committee agree the recommendation is set out in the report to A? Members are asked to receive the audit report of the council's external audits on the 2021 accounts and to know that there are expected to be no unadjusted audit differences to the accounts. B, members are asked to consider the updated 2020-21 statement of accounts and to approve these as the council's final audited accounts for the year. The committee is further asked to authorise the chair to acknowledge this approval on behalf of the committee by signing the appropriate section within the statement of responsibilities on page 1 of the accounts. And C, on the basis of this assurance received, the chair is asked to sign the management representation letters on behalf of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. I will take silence as a yes. There we go. So the recommendation has been accepted. Moving on to the next item then, which is the annual assurance report on employment policies and procedures.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to remind the committee, my name is Andy Dobman. I'm the Chief Officer for HR. What you've got is my annual report to this committee, which endeavours to provide you with assurance that employment conduct is properly managed and that our policies in the employment domain are regularly updated and reviewed. The paper also sets out the activity that would take place to ensure that our employment activity is appropriately aligned to the organisational plan, the council's ambitions, and of course the people's strategy. We shared with you our well-established and robust mechanisms that we have in place for reviewing, consulting and engaging our key stakeholders on the content of our employment practice and our policies. So, for example, our regular dialogue we have with our elected members, particularly our deputy leader and exec member for resources. A lot of the employment activity also appears at scrutiny. As you'd expect, we also have frequent engagement with our staff networks and trade unions. We engage directly with our staff through staff surveys and equally a close working relationship with our legal services and our audit colleagues. I won't page turn the document, but perhaps very briefly, I'll just share a few highlights of the last year that appear in the paper. First of all, like most employers, we've had a very difficult year in terms of operating a challenging labour market. So over the last year or so, we've focused very much on augmenting and reviewing our recruitment and selection policy practices and toolkits. In the year, we've also undertaken a grievance practice review, which was done independently of the HR team. At the start of the calendar year, so the start of 2022, we also reviewed and refreshed our organisational values and behaviours. And we're now working across the organisation to ensure that they are appropriately embedded through our policies and our procedures. And I guess final brief comment from me is also during the last 12 months, we kick-started a significant leadership and management development offer, focused very much on our 2,500 managers. So this is very much about building their confidence and capability in understanding our employment policies, but also the application of those documents and policies. So we started that about springtime of last year, and we're sort of midway through that process. So that gives us more assurance and more commitment that we are moving in the right direction. I'll pause there, Chair, and then open it up to any questions. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from members? Councillor Triswell.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. It's obviously a report that covers a very comprehensive area, and it's impossible to have detail of everything, and there are some links to various other documents. When I was reading through the documents, I saw that there was an accent on expectations on staff, on recruitment, on grievances, on values and behaviour, on leadership and management. But apart from the use of the word well-being in one or two contexts, I didn't feel that it necessarily focused on the role as an employer, as council's role, as an employer to address the welfare of staff, because I think we're all conscious over the last 13 years, because of massive government cuts in funding, that we've got something like 2,800 to 3,000 fewer staff. Invariably, that puts pressure on the remaining staff because there's still work that needs to be done. We're operating a vacancy factor as part and parcel of trying to make savings to address those cuts in funding. We have in some areas, I understand from other meetings, recruitment difficulties, which again puts pressure on those staff who are still in post and trying to fill the void. So I just wondered whether either the report or whether this committee or strategy and resources scrutiny are actually focusing on those well-being issues, because we know, for example, through recent research, that the NHS, which is not directly comparable with the council in all respects, actually loses more staff hours, or has lost more staff hours over the last 3 years as a result of stress rather than COVID, which, you know, I think is kind of counterintuitive. So it is to ensure that we do put up front that role as being a good employer in addressing the welfare and the services available to staff, and the appreciation of the extra pressures that what we've had to do over the last 13 years actually puts on the remaining staff that we've got.
Thank you, Councillor. No, you're absolutely right. Staff wellbeing and health and safety has been at the heart of our people's strategy over the last 2 years. And there's a whole suite of different interventions and actions that we are taking place at the moment. You rightly mentioned increases in ill health due to COVID, but also due to mental health and musculoskeletal and the like. So we do have a specific action plan that we're midway through at the moment on that. So we pivoted a lot of HR resource and managerial resource to support those issues. We also kick-started this year with a new mental health strategy across the organisation, which focused very much on promotion of mental health, trying to re-emphasise towards the prevention of mental ill health, and also getting the right support to the right people at the right time. So that's a lot of activity in train too. And probably in future, the report could tease out more of that activity, but just to assure the committee, it is very much at the heart of our activity.
Just coming back and to emphasise that we need to ensure a lot of this work is proactive and anticipates the pressures on staff and what the results might be. It's very tempting to just be reactive, and that's the point which you intervene once the problem's arisen and people are feeling the pressures. Sorry, I did have one other non-related question, but obviously I got off on the obvious and I forgot to ask it. It's on page 123, and it's the reference in paragraph 73 to benchmarking opportunities. It talks about the opportunities for benchmarking, but I just wondered what that might mean in detail, what we might benchmark in future that would obviously assist this committee and scrutiny board to compare our activities with other authorities.
Yeah, thank you. Just going back to the health and wellbeing piece, this issue about staff burnout and the wellbeing piece was part of the outcome from the LGA peer review, which took place in November of last year. So there's going to be some very specific actions for us to pick up in any event. So we're hoping that we'll be able to address that issue. Just in terms of benchmarking, absolutely, we're very mindful of that. So there's a whole range of different things that we could benchmark. So there's some of the fairly obvious employment related indicators that we can look at in terms of our ability, say, to recruit and retain our workforce. But equally, you mentioned about health in the workplace, so sickness, absence, turnover, those types of metrics. So there's a whole suite, and at the moment, what we're doing is working with some of the partners to really get better at analysing that benchmark. So, for example, we do engage with the LGA, which is a good source of information, so we can compare ourselves. I spend a fair bit of time with the Core Cities group because they're more comparable types of organisations to ourselves. So we do share quite a lot of information. We also share geographically. So with our district local authorities, there's quite a good access to information that we can share, and then we can benchmark. And also one of the other areas of interest for us is looking particularly within the city. So as you know, that we have really strong relationships with our anchor networks. So again, there's a lot of sharing of information, particularly demographic information and diversity information with our big employers in the city. So particularly the NHS, but higher education institutions, utilities, those other comparable city-based organisations. So there's a lot going on in this space. And I guess it's back to Louise's point earlier, is that you probably can never have too much data, but it's about trying to focus attention of where it's probably going to get the maximum benefit for us.
Right, not only have you got one, but you've got three party armed forces champions in the room, Councillor Almas and obviously Councillor Flynn and myself. So this is by way of a thank you. Because we have now embedded into our work. We have the Silver Covenant, and we're obviously going to go for gold either this year or next year. So a big thank you for embedding the training days and all the requirements into what you do. I understand it's guaranteed interviews and feedback for armed forces personnel who want to apply for jobs. All their transferable skills actually are fantastic. So hopefully that will continue for a long time. And put out a plea. We have some of the most fantastic staff networks. And we're hoping that going forward that we can develop a staff network for reservists that we have within the authority, and also civilian trainers who work so hard with our young people, the cadets and so on. But it's just a big thank you, and long may it continue.
Well, thank you, Councillor, for the first point, and your second point. Very happy to work with colleagues in terms of considering that staff network, and we can work with you on that. Thank you.
Just a question from me, and it's kind of, it links into the well-being stuff and staff burnout, etc. And it's around the consistency of performance management, which is probably not always the most popular topic to discuss. But for an organisation of our size, and certainly thinking about the well-being discussion, you know, where some staff are maybe struggling or need support to be able to complete their functions, that has an impact on the wider organisation and the well-being of others. And there's always been a feeling from some members that the consistency of performance and management across the organisation is a little bit not there. So what assurance do we have in terms of how we're actually, as part of an integrated strategy, looking after people's well-being, etc., making sure we're getting the best out of the staff, that we have a consistent and appropriate performance management process across the entirety of the council? Because it doesn't feel like we always do.
Thank you, Chair. It is a key issue, and it is important to have two things. I think the first thing is a robust policy and procedural framework and a toolkit. So when individuals are under pressure or challenging their role, that there's an appropriate mechanism to work through that. The second bit, which is perhaps the hardest bit, is more about the application of those policies and procedures. And with so many managers, I mentioned earlier, the 2,500 managers we've got, then the key task for us is to ensure that they are appropriately trained and skilled, so they are in the best place to support their staff. We do feel that we have got a pretty robust approach, as well as that formal policy and procedures. We do try to emphasise the more informal and that preventative approach to performance management. So as you know, we've gone quite large as an organisation on that one-to-one support and supervision. We play a big role in terms of the management of appraisals, and we have a very large compliance rate of appraisals across the organisation. We also have mechanisms like mediation, the consultation engagement we have with our trade unions over individual cases. So the whole suite of different interventions. And it's always our preference that those problems that you've described are managed through those more informal routes without accessing those more formal processes. Saying all of that, you are right about the application of that mechanism, because we're so big and so diverse. And that's really one of the reasons why we kick-started the Leadership and Management Development Programme mid-year last year, called Be Your Best. And part of that programme is specifically designed to support our managers on supporting them, I guess, with those perhaps tricky conversations managers may not like to have with staff, particularly when people find themselves in difficulties and with challenges. So we're doing a lot of support for our new managers, our aspiring managers, but also more experienced managers, supporting, guiding them through some of that. That's work in progress because there's a lot of people to support, a lot of people to train, but I think we've now got that framework in place. And I think perhaps this time next year, when we're further down that training program, we'll be able to give you more assurance as to how that's landed.
So just a couple of quick follow-up questions for me, and obviously appreciate the informal bit. How many people in the council are currently on a performance management formal of any sort? Because obviously we're a very large organisation, and are we comparable to other organisations of a similar scale? And how long is a piece of string? At what point do you go from informal to formal? Because again, we want to support our staff absolutely for well-being reasons. But again, if there's an impact on the wider staff body because people are not performing, that creates problems and well-being for other people. So it's great that we're having a very informal process, but at what point does that become formal? And at what point does someone understand that actually there can't be a conversation infinitum? At some point, there are procedures. So first question, how many people roughly are on a performance management program? And is that comparable to organisations of a similar size? And secondly, at what point does it become formal?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the numbers first, so we have around 7 to 10 members of staff through formal processes at the moment. There's the same number again who are accessing a different procedure, because as you can expect, some individuals will have ill health issues as well as performance issues, possibly also misconduct issues. So they will be part of that performance approach, but maybe through a different process. And there's around 3 or 4 times more cases that we're aware of that are being addressed with those more informal mechanisms that I mentioned earlier. So the numbers are still relatively small, but nevertheless, they could access those different types of either different procedures, or equally we're endeavouring to try to manage them through the informal route, because that usually gets a better outcome. Your second question, just in terms of that, sort of at what point do they move from that informality to formality, or equally, as I said earlier, they may move from one process to another, because that is also quite frequent. The policies that I've referenced do give some support and guidance to that. So there is a framework that gives some clarity to managers in terms of when it's appropriate. But ultimately, it is a managerial judgment about at what point do you keep managing something through an informal route, and when do you seek escalation? And that's really what the HR business partnering team is there to do. So they will give the professional advice to managers in terms of at what point may you trigger formality, or equally at what point may you trigger a different process, or equally, is there an alternative solution? So one thing we try to get better at is, I think you mentioned it earlier, about individuals struggling in their role just because their role isn't quite the right fit for them, because perhaps there's a skills gap. And what we've got better at over the last year or so is flexibly deploying people into alternative roles, which is a better outcome than it is taking people through quite a long, complicated process. So we're always trying to look at those different options, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of clarity.
It makes it sound like it's an auditing nightmare because there's no rigidity to it. And actually, from an auditing perspective, how do you audit something? And we're here to get assurance. And I'm assured that the council is putting its staff front and foremost because we're prioritising informality and support. But from an assurance point of view, for an organisation of our size and our spend and our impact on the lives of the people of this city, to hear that basically there's not a lot of people on formal performance management. How is that comparable to other authorities or other similar sized organisations?
It's a difficult one to answer because most organisations wouldn't share that. But also most organisations in the framework I've described will report in a different way too, because there is that slight uncertainty about when is something formal versus informal, or equally when you're trying to find a remediative solution. So for example, if you do have some particular challenges with individuals, you may be going through a mediation route. Do you describe a mediation route as a formal intervention that you can capture and report, or actually is the mediation more informal to try to find a quick remedy? So when comparing, it's tricky because each employer will probably come at this in a slightly different way. And therefore, I accept it is hard for us to compare and contrast between ourselves and others. I think the key thing that we do try to measure is some of the metrics that we mentioned earlier in terms of the levels of commitment and engagement that our workforce have across the organisation, their sense of health and well-being across the organisation, and equally some of the metrics that we look at is their relationship with their manager, which we capture in the staff surveys. We think that's a pretty good indicator as to how those relationships between members of staff and the employer feels across our services.
I think you'll be coming back before your next annual report, if I'm honest, because I think we need more assurance around how the most important resource we have in this authority, which is our people, are managed. And I have to be really honest, your answer does not give me assurance. And so you will be coming back to this body sometime earlier than your normal schedule, but we'll pick that up outside of the meeting. The further questions or comments? Nope. So moving to the recommendation then, does the committee agree with the recommendation set out in this report to receive the report and the attached appendix 1 together, providing key forms of assurance with the caveats I've just raised on the robustness of the council's employment policies and employment contracts? I will take silence as a yes. Thank you. So last agenda item, work programme.
Yes, this is the last time you get to see the work programme for this municipal year. So there's one meeting left. At the next meeting, I will be producing the proposed work programme for the 23-24 municipal year. If anybody has anything that they would like to see on that work programme, any suggestions, if you can let me know, then I can have that full discussion with the chair when I put the proposal together ready for your discussion. I will also be bringing the proposed development plan for committee to support that work programme. So any suggestions as to what would be helpful going forward for the committee, what you've appreciated this year and would like to see again, what you think was an absolute waste of time, quite frankly, that would be really, really helpful to know. So if you can email me those thoughts, please.
And on that, the next meeting is planned for 10 a.m. on Monday, the 20th of March, 2023, and I will intend to get the early bus. I conclude the meeting. Thank you.